In 2019, an ambitious little game called Bright Memory arrived on Steam Early Access. Despite the occasional bugs and some weird translation issues, players were actually quite impressed with the visually stunning but short experience. More so because the entire thing was created by a single developer in his spare time. Instead of working on the next part of the story, the developer decided to spend a few years remaking, rebuilding, and extending the game where possible. The story was fleshed out a bit more, the gameplay was updated and improved, and that leads us to the release of the game that we're talking about today. That game is Bright Memory Infinite, and I have to say, while it's still criminally short, it was enjoyable to play through. It looks great, feels good to play, and runs unbelievably well on the PS5. I personally feel like the asking price is just a little bit too high for what you get, but as with most things, value is completely subjective. So what is Bright Memory Infinite? Well, it's a first-person shooter that blends first-person gun combat with first-person spectacle fighter gameplay. You'll be able to utilize ranged weapons such as assault rifles, shotguns, and sniper rifles, as well as a sword for close-range melee attacks. You'll also have access to some psychokinesis-style skills and the ability to upgrade your character throughout the game. In 2036, players take on the role of Shelia, a special ops expert who's working for the SRO, which is the Science Research Organization. Her mission is to stop the SAI, a military group, from taking control of an ancient power that can bring the dead back to life. As usual, I won't be going any further and I won't be spoiling the rest of the plot in my review, but that is the basic setup. I think it's really important to mention up front that the story can be completed in under 2 hours, and my first playthrough took me around an hour and 50 minutes. The game does feature various difficulty levels, and the trophies and achievements seem designed with multiple playthroughs in mind. So considering that there's 4 difficulty levels and the fact that you would be familiar with the game's layout after the first playthrough, you could say that at best you'll be getting somewhere between 6 to 8 hours of content. Gameplay wise, I suppose you could call Bright Memory Infinite a gallery shooter, a corridor shooter, or perhaps a mix of the two. Progression through the story is very linear except for a few little nooks and crannies that usually contain ammo or the items that are used to upgrade your character. When you enter an area, you clear out all of the enemies using whatever type of offensive capabilities that you have, and then you move to the next area, rinse and repeat. Over the course of the game, you'll be engaging in firefights with standard soldier-type enemies with guns, as well as some supernatural warriors and beasts. Some of the rank-and-file enemies are taken down very quickly, but you will encounter a few elite opponents from time to time. These need to be taken a little bit more seriously, and a lot of the time they have a specific way to fight them effectively. For example, melee enemies that rush you should be parried with your sword to open them up for a counterattack. As you might expect, there are a few boss battles and encounters, as well as a few small sections that break up the normal gameplay, such as driving sections and a small stealth section. Shelia has a decent amount of tools that she can use to turn her aggressors into meaty chunks, and pretty much all of them can be upgraded using these small jade relics hidden throughout the levels. You'll also be able to obtain essence by breaking crates in the environment, which unlocks some of the upgrades for purchase. In terms of mobility, Shelia can double jump, slide across the floor, wall run, and dash to avoid incoming attacks. All of these movement options can be woven into the gunplay and melee attacks to create some very stylish looking combat encounters. Speaking of gunplay and melee attacks, each ranged weapon has a powerful alternate firing mode which can be accessed by pressing up on the D-pad when wielding a specific weapon. These do require special ammunition and the amount you can hold is limited. However, there is a relatively plentiful supply of it if you take a moment to look around for it. Your sword is capable of blocking enemy attacks, parrying, deflecting projectiles, and producing hack and slash style combos. You can even launch your enemies into the air and perform an air combo in a similar way to something like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta. Lastly, let's quickly talk about the performance on the PS5 and Series X. I played this on the PS5 and believe it or not, this game runs at a close to perfect 60 FPS at 4K with ray tracing enabled. It also includes 120 FPS performance mode if your monitor or TV can handle it. There are a few other graphical options to make use of on the console version, including field of view, VSync, and motion blur intensity. Bright Memory Infinite is, believe it or not, also coming to the Nintendo Switch, and it won't be via the cloud. It's actually going to run natively on the hardware, but it is important to note that there is no physical copy for any version of the game on any platform. So what did I think of the game? Well, I enjoyed it, but it's a tough one, and I'm kind of torn between two trains of thought. On the one hand, the whole thing is very impressive for just one developer in their spare time. I think the environments are very well put together both in terms of fidelity and design, while the combat feels really snappy and fun to engage with. I don't think the story is really anything to write home about, but as far as I understand it, there is supposed to be more to come in the future, so I guess I'm alright with this just being the setup. On top of all that, the game runs far better than most AAA releases in recent memory. I am aware that this is just a linear experience with lots of set-pieced moments, but still, it's just incredibly well optimized. The visuals, especially with ray tracing enabled, look rather good in my opinion. Each area that you visit just feels so alive due to the heavy weather effects, level design, and near flawless performance. There were quite a few times where I just stopped to admire the view, and I was genuinely impressed by what I saw. I found the combat and traversal to be great for the most part, with only a few rough edges showing here and there. The shooting feels really good, and it's just so much better than you think it would be. All the guns are fun to use, and they all have a real kick to them with punchy sounds and strong visual feedback. Another thing that I thought was pretty cool is the way that the enemies take damage. It's a little bit like the way they do it in Gears of War or perhaps Outriders in terms of gore, albeit slightly less so. Shotguns can take heads off and the sword can hack limbs away, and you do get this occasional brief moment of slow motion on some kills that feel really satisfying to pull off. I think the side systems like the upgrades and the stealth mechanics are perfectly serviceable. They're nothing special, but they are at least there and they work fine. So overall, this is all good positive stuff, but then on the other hand, it is under 2 hours long and it'll set you back around £16 in the UK or about $20 in the US. Now obviously I was given a review code, so I didn't actually pay for my copy of the game. It would be real easy of me to just sit here and say, yeah, try the game out, I think it's pretty good even though it's short. As I said though, I didn't pay for my copy, so I think it would be unfair to recommend that you purchase it. The reason I bring this up is because value is always going to be subjective to the person playing the game. I think the value proposition is going to be a really important factor when it comes to whether or not you decide to pick this game up. I've taken a look at the storefronts and it doesn't mention that the game is under 2 hours long anywhere that I can see. I can imagine some potential customers quickly looking up some gameplay, then buying the game and being very disappointed when it ends so quickly, and that would be a real shame. I think everybody is going to see this a little bit differently, but if you ask me how much I would pay for it in order to be happy with my purchase, I'd say around $7.99 in the UK and about $9.99 in the US at the very most. I think the main issue that players will face is that a lot of demos or trial versions are longer than this entire game and you don't generally have to pay for those. Admittedly, this does feel like a demo that you have to pay for, and I hate to say that, but it just does. I mean, yeah, it looks great, it's surprisingly fun to play, but it's over before it really begins, and that makes it kinda hard to recommend. If you want to support the single developer and throw them a few bucks, then by all means do pick the game up. As I said earlier, you could play through the game multiple times on different difficulty levels, and some trophies do actually require it, so you could definitely stretch out the content a little bit here and there if you wanted to. In my opinion, Bright Memory Infinite is a very impressive demo created by a single developer who clearly has a knack for this sort of thing. The vast majority of the experience is a pleasure to look at and quite fun to play with only a few minor imperfections. It was genuinely very enjoyable to play through with lots of action throughout, but it was over way too quickly. And that's the problem, we're being asked to pay for this, and I think for a lot of players, that price will be too high. The developer absolutely deserves to get paid for his good work, but I think it's a bit too short to be sold for $20. If he could have made the game maybe 4 hours long, then you're getting more in line with the typical indie game length, and I think at that point $20 wouldn't be off the table. Ultimately, this is one of those weird games that I can't really recommend either way. I think this one is going to come down to one thing and one thing alone, and that for most people will be, is it worth the money? I suspect the answer will be a simple no for a lot of players. That said, if you like what you see, don't mind the 2-hour runtime, and you're happy to pay the asking price, then I'd absolutely say go for it. I mean, it plays and looks far better than it has any right to be, so I think you'll be happy with it in that situation. Otherwise, if I'm being realistic, I would suggest either waiting for a sale or skipping this one entirely unless you're fully aware of what you're getting into. If you enjoyed the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.